madame. All right. Good afternoon. In a short while, I will be joined virtually by Achim Steiner, the administrator of the UN Development Program, as well as Cassie Flynn, UNDP's climate change advisor. They will join us to discuss the results of UNDP's global opinion poll on climate action, which was done in partnership with the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom. As a reminder, tomorrow at 1 p.m., right here in this room, the Secretary General will hold a press conference on his priorities for 2021. Early in the day, he will deliver remarks to the General Assembly as well. We will have interpretation available in French and Spanish. For those people joining remotely, you'll be able to access simultaneous interpretation on the Interprefy platform. We will send you the instructions on how to do that via email. And obviously, if the boss speaks, I don't, so there will not be a noon briefing. Speaking by video message at the virtual event to mark International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust, the Secretary General paid tribute to the memory of all victims to the Holocaust. Today's meeting takes place under the shadow of the pandemic, he said. COVID-19 has put societies to the test, revealing long-standing fractures and injustices, adding that the pandemic has also contributed to a resurgence in xenophobia and hate speech, including anti-Semitism. In Europe, in the US, and elsewhere, white supremacists are organizing and recruiting across border, shamelessly flaunting the symbols of the Nazis and their murderous ambitions. This must be a year of healing, he said. There is no vaccine for anti-Semitism and xenophobia, and the most effective weapons remains the facts and the truths, the Secretary General concluded. The UN will continue to stand for the truth and against lies, bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hatred. The full program, including panel discussions, can be followed on our UN Web TV platform. The Secretary General also spoke via video, pre-recorded video message at a high-level webinar today on Africa, COVID-19 vaccine financing and deployment strategy. He again stressed on the need for vaccines to be accessible and affordable to all, calling for everyone to work together to prioritize those most at risk in all countries and close the financing gap. The Secretary General commended the African Union's efforts to secure an additional 270 million vaccine doses for African countries. He again called on all countries, economies, and manufacturers to work with and through the COVAX facility to realize the commitments of equitable access, especially for the most vulnerable. The Secretary General said that as additional vaccines come through the development pipeline, he calls on manufacturers to prioritize the review of data in the World Health Organization so they can be deployed by COVAX as quickly as possible. Quick humanitarian update for you on Yemen. We have where the risk of the famine continues to rise. Our humanitarian colleagues inform us that around 50,000 Yemenis are already living in famine-like conditions today, with 5 million more just one step away. With food prices at 150% higher than the average before the conflict and the depreciation of the Yemeni rial, the threat of hunger for millions is a reality. We must do all we can to prevent widespread famine now. We need more humanitarian funding, greater support for the economy through foreign exchange injections, and an end to violence. To date, the 2020 Yemen Humanitarian Response Plan has only received 56% of the money it needs. That's $1.89 billion of the $3.38 billion needed to fund the operation. Turning to Syria, where I just want to give you an update on the really dire situation in relations to the floods and winter conditions and the impact it's had on vulnerable people throughout the country. As of January 26th, more than 67,000 internally displaced people in almost 200 sites throughout the northwest of the country have been affected, with nearly 11,500 tents either destroyed or damaged. 1 death and 3 injuries have been confirmed as a result. Heavy rainfall has also impacted internally displaced people elsewhere in the country, including in the southern rural Tartus area, where families have been forced to relocate. Winter conditions are a particular concern for the estimated 2.2 million internally displaced people living in inadequate shelter conditions across Syria. We, alongside our humanitarian partners, are mobilizing an additional assistance to support the impacted families. As of January 1st, more than 1.6 million individuals across Syria were reached with winter-related assistance. This includes 850,000 in northwest Syria, 250,000 in northeast Syria, and almost 500,000 people in government-held areas. We remain concerned that many vulnerable families are not sufficiently prepared for winter due to the continued funding gap of $20.4 million for winterization efforts across Syria. More than 500,000 people could be unreachable with winter assistance. And in South Sudan, we've been giving you updates about the deadly clashes there. The UN mission in the country recently trained traditional leaders on the conflict management and reconciliation processes in Malakal and Upper Nile State. More than 30 local chiefs residing in Malakal in the mission's protection of civilians in the town took part in the training, which featured conflict management skills, promote reconciliation, social cohesions in and between communities. And in Somalia, this month marks the 30th anniversary since the civil war broke out in the country. And today, James Swan, the Secretary General Special Representative, paid tribute to the courage and resilience of the Somali people, who have persevered through some of what he called the toughest conditions in any country on the planet in the past 3 decades. Speaking at a press conference, Mr. Swan noted that while enormous challenges remain, it is important to acknowledge that the progress has been made. He pointed to successes, including the functioning of national and federal member state institutions and private sector investment. On the country's current impasse over the elections, Mr. Swan reiterated his call for Somalia's leaders to pursue compromise and dialogue for the good of the country. His full press release is now online. The Security Council here held a closed-door meeting and heard from the head of the UN Regional Center for Prevention and Diplomacy in Central Asia, and that is Natalia German, who is the Secretary General Special Representative in that area. Quick COVID updates, one from Brazil, where the UN team has been supporting the public health system in the northern state of Amazonas, which currently struggling to cope with the impact of the pandemic. In the last 5 days, the UN team has delivered more than 160,000 items to hospitals and emergency rooms. These include 60 cylinders of oxygen to maternity wards. The head of the UN team, Nikki Fabianic, met virtually with the authorities in all of northern states to discuss how to support people's needs. This includes creating a funding scheme to help authorities immediately respond and recover better in a sustainable way. The governor of Amazonas, Wilson Lima, thanked the UN for its support during this emergency and says it is essential to complement existing local and national efforts. And in Egypt, we have been supporting national efforts to fight against the pandemic. Egypt's massive vaccination plan, one of the largest among Arab states, began this week with technical support from UN experts. The UN conducted risk assessment as part of the COVAX requirements. We're working with authorities to include migrants and refugees in the vaccine rollout plan. Priorities is being given to the frontline health workers and other vulnerable groups. The UN team is also focused on coordination, procurement, and distribution of vaccines, as well as supply chain management and health care management. We're also working with the government on its communication strategy and community engagement to halt the spread of the virus and curb misinformation to ensure widespread public vaccination. And just to note that in her annual report to the Human Rights Council, Virginia Gamba who heads the Children in Armed Conflict Office, said she is deeply concerned about the pandemic's adverse impact on children impacted by armed conflict. She urged member states to take child rights into account in their measures to contain the spread of COVID-19 and ensure that child protection services can continue despite the pandemic. Ms. Gamba also stressed the importance for parties to the conflict to respect the civilian nature of schools, health infrastructure, and associated protected personnel. And this is her report to the Human Rights Council. The annual report to the Security Council will come later this year. Two more notes. UNHCR has released its 2021 Strategic Action Plan today, calling on the international community to do more to save lives of refugees taking risky routes towards the Mediterranean. UNHCR is seeking over $100 million to enhance refugee protection in Africa, in countries to the route, African countries en route to the Mediterranean, offering safe and viable alternatives to the perilous journey during which too many people are facing abuse and death is a critical priority. And we have now reached 20 members of our honor roll. Anybody can guess what country just joined? Our friends in Bratislava. So we warmly thank Slovakia for making it onto the honor roll and taking us to a nice 20. Mr. Bays.
Okay, first, following yesterday's Security Council meeting on the Israelis and Palestinians, the Israeli ambassador focused on Iran. There was then a pushback from the Iranians, a war of words. We've also heard from Israel's military chief of staff saying they're coming up for new military plans with regard to Iran. How concerned is the Secretary General in this rise in the temperature when he wants everyone to go back to the Iran deal?
Look, you're correct that the Secretary General is very keen to see a renewed commitment to the JCPOA and a renewed commitment to reviving it in a sense. Rhetoric that heightens tensions coming from any side is never very helpful.
And another question, I'll give you two questions, but because you might want to link them together. One, the US is saying it is going to start funding UNRWA again. And then a hint from the new US ambassador designate in her confirmation hearing that they may well restart funding to UNFPA. So your reaction to those bits of news?
I mean, you know, I watched part of the confirmation hearings. I mean, all of it, if confirmed, is obviously welcome news, and for us, going in the right direction. We know the impact that the cutting of U.S. funding had on UNRWA, and we also know the impact it had on UNFPA. Okay, if you have a question before we go to Mr. Steiner, wave your hands up in the air, like Toby, and then Errol. Go ahead, Toby.
Hi, thanks, Stéphane. I just want to follow up on James's question about UNRWA. So you're still waiting for the U.S. to reach out and confirm any actions related to UNRWA. That's my first question. And then my second question is, did you put out a formal reaction to the New START announcements by Moscow and Washington? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I had too many things going on at once here. On UNRWA, I mean, we also heard very positive statements from the U.S. representative in the Security Council. Yesterday, we heard what the permanent representative designate had to say. We'll check with UNRWA if anything officially has happened, but obviously the messages there in the air are indeed very positive. On the New START, we obviously saw the reports of the votes in the Russian parliament. We also saw the statements that have been made. And, you know, the Secretary General has been very consistent in his support for this extension of the New START treaty. I think it's a good means of maintaining viable limits on the world's two largest nuclear arsenals, and also giving time for both the U.S. and the Russian Federation to sit down and negotiate. Errol. And then Abdelhamid.
Yes, thank you, Steph.
Yeah. Go ahead.
many people are predicting that the life is going to be much easier for the Secretary General Guterres for his pursuing his multilateralism at the United Nations with the Biden administration. Can you, from your point of view, give me a recent example where the multilateralism track will be easier with the Biden administration for the Secretary General?
Well, you know, the life of a Secretary General is never easy. I've been able to witness that for a number of years now. It's always full of challenges. Member states are here to defend their positions and stake their turf, so to speak. We always hope it is done in the spirit of multilateralism. I mean, we did see one of the first decisions taken by the administration of the new U.S. president was to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, to rejoin or at least halt the withdrawal of the World Health Organization. So I think those are two very powerful symbols on the first day of the importance of multilateralism for the U.S. administration. But I will leave you to do the deeper analysis. Abdel,
what about
go ahead.
Iran? If I can just small follow-up.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
What about Iran deal that everybody is talking?
What about it? I mean, we've stated our position. We very much hope that the parties will re-engage and re-engage on the basis of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Abdelhamid.
Oh, thank you, Stéphane. There is a report on Yemen. It's an international report that says that the government had lost more lands to the Houthis. The reports also mentioned the corruption within the Yemeni government and also mentioned that $1 billion the Houthis took over from the government funds. It's a lengthy report, but I want to hear more from you about it. And in fact, I didn't see it, but it was in the
Well, I mean, I read from what I read from the Reuters report is that it was a leaked copy of a report by the panel of experts to the Security Council. So these, as you know, do not come through our little hands. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Sato, and then we'll go to Mr. Steiner.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
And James, please.
And James, yes, of course. Go ahead. Go ahead, Sato-san. I can't hear you.
Sorry, James. Thank you. My question is, you're wearing the very nice badge. My question is about this morning, U.S. Science magazine released the so-called doomsday clock. It hovered 100 seconds until the extinction of mankind, same as last year. Do you have any comment on that?
Sorry, it is something to be taken seriously. You know, if I'm not mistaken, this doomsday clock has to do with issues relating to disarmament, to nuclear disarmament, among others. So I think it underscores the need for member states to support efforts of disarmament through a multilateral process, whether it's for the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which has come into to force, which is, I think, a very strong and direct message by the international community, and on a more practical level, to give impetus to the U.S. and the Russian Federation to negotiate a full extension of the New START treaty.